Oh no.
So, hello, this is MMT and the Public Purpose. Tonight's topic is never let them forget. The U.S. government can always create new money for the Treasury spending account. And why is this so very important? You will see as we go through this program. So, we are here. Host Lisa Theobald and myself, of course, Joe Firestone. We're both here for tonight. We're going to be discussing things among themselves. This, of course, is an MMT stream, and the topic is one that is very, very important, okay, for MMT when it gets applied to politics.
Indeed.
The reason why I came up with the topic is because something very frustrating for me, frustrating over the years, but particularly frustrating now. I got involved with MMT right at the end of 2009. And now we're in the second half of 2022. And at various times, we've gotten people to accept the idea that the government can always add to the electronic credits that are in the Treasury spending account. However, while people realize this again and again, and again, it still almost never makes it into the press. It almost never makes it into the mainstream. It almost never gets into debates. And when for a while it does get into debates, then it seems like just a few months later it's forgotten and it's no longer in the debates any longer.
Doesn't stick.
It doesn't stick. And so what this stream is about is what we have to do to make it stick. We have to never let them forget that the government can always create new money in the Treasury spending account. But I'm now going to have to be precise about it.
Yes, I think we are, because of the climate and the topic and the discussion around creating money.
All right, but I was now just wanting to be precise in reference to my title. For the sake of people coming to see this, I thought if I said the U.S. government can always create new money for the Treasury spending account, that would draw people in. Technically, though, there are, quote, reserves, unquote, in the Treasury spending account. What reserves are is electronic credits, basically. But when such things are in the Treasury spending account, those are not part of the money supply.
Correct.
So technically, there's no money in the Treasury account at the Fed. but there are electronic credits that Treasury can spend into the non-government sector. So, to go on with this now, having clarified that technical point, I've been watching the discussion over the elimination of student debt and the actions of Joe Biden, and that provides an example of why we should not forget that the United States can always create new new electronic credits or new money, quote unquote, for the Treasury General Account, which is the technical name for the Treasury spending account. That account is held at the New York Fed, by the way, in case you're curious as to where it is. It sits physically at the New York Fed Bank. So, Biden's been getting criticized for canceling student debt on grounds that what he's done so far, in other words, just the $10,000 debt, $10,000 of the debt, or in the case of Pell Grant recipients, but $20,000 of the debt.
Means tested to 125,000 a year.
Means tested to $125,000 a year, which is a violation of the promise that he made, because in his earlier promise, he didn't qualify by saying that it was going to be limited to $125,000 a year.
And that, you know, I just want to make a statement here because it's really important.
Go ahead.
There are a lot of people who are aghast by the idea of someone making $124,000 a year qualifying for this, in the perspective of feeling, you know, we're lucky if we're making 50 grand a year. And I truly understand that. However, to be carrying loads and loads of student debt when you come out of college and you go into a profession, it is really important to understand that people go into a profession. Some of them, I mean, I've got people in my family who carried $500,000 worth of debt.
Oh my God.
They paid for their undergrad. They paid for medical school. And, you know, by the time they got out, did their residencies, and then they get hired. It's really, really important that people understand that today's doctors, when they get hired, by the time they've got to that space where they get an offer, they're not making bank like doctors used to make 20, 30 years ago once they get accepted and then they got hired into a hospital that was, you know, well endowed, often private, you know, community supported, long before the insurance industry got a hold of them. Okay. And even then, you've got to be a doctor for a good period of time and prove yourself before they got themselves into a situation where they started making real money, got into a practice, got privileges at hospitals, made a reputation for themselves. That's a long haul, carrying $500,000 worth of debt that's earning interest. Oftentimes those loans earn interest from the date of disbursement.
Yes, it can be very, very hard for some people, even if they are making now $125,000 per year.
And that's still, it depends on where you are. If you're living in Irvine, California, the rent there is astronomical. You know, a 1-bedroom apartment in Irvine, because you're in Irvine because there are huge corporate complexes there. 1-bedroom apartments are going for $3,500, and you've got to have first, last security and you know, everything that goes with that. right? So $125,000 might be something that makes a heck of a lot of sense for some people and doesn't make any sense for others. And that's the problem when you get into this broad swaths of standardized means testing, right?
Right. That's right. People's circumstances are different, and they're different, okay, according to the area of the country they're in. 125,000 is not the same in the middle of Ohio, rural Ohio somewhere, in rural Kansas, as it is in New York or in Irvine, California, okay, as Lisa mentions, or up in Alaska, where
Sure.
the cost of living is very, very high also.
So it is good for those individuals who are living in areas that are not as economically outrageous from the standpoint of a cost of living, okay? But it's also important to remember that by the time you get to the point of making that kind of money, okay, where you're able to plunk down, if you're lucky, a couple grand a month on your student loans on top. I mean, I know people who had $1,400 student loan payments and they only were carrying about 80 grand of debt. Okay. And that was their earnings, income allocated, put it into the Disso Master. You're making this much money annual or annualized. This is your take home monthly. This is what we expect you to pay. And anything less from that, you can always go to, there's options to go to interest only payments, right? Or minimum payments based on a hardship situation. But you've got to remember that all that does is add that interest. And when you're doing compounded interest daily,
It gets big.
especially when you're talking
Very
7.5%, 8%, and some of these loans are even more, and if this is also something that's important. 30 years ago, 35 years ago, loans that were taken out were going at 4. Okay. 7.5, 8 at compounded daily interest. And then with any type of an economic hiccup where you've got to put your loans into forbearance, depending
right.
on your
You
loan,
lost your job or something like that.
and depending on your loan servicer as well. If you
Right.
find yourself in a situation where you don't have $12,000 or $1,200 this month or next month or for the foreseeable future, right?
Right. And that may be true, even though you're making or you were making $125,000 a year.
And we all know that you can wake up and step out of bed and go to the bathroom and brush your teeth and something happens and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, an hour ago I was financially viable.
Right. And
That
now,
happens to people now
yes, it
on the
does.
regular, right? So it's very easy to find yourself in a place where you can't make those payments. And it depends on the type of loan you have. But sometimes, and I don't know if this is legal anymore, but back when we were carrying our burdened debt, my peer group, my college folk, people found themselves in situations where their only option to rehabilitate themselves because they got delinquent, or God forbid you had a Perkins loan and you missed a payment by one day, they would throw you into default. And coming out of default, there were certain loan servicers who would force you into consolidation. And sometimes once you were into consolidation, your loans were no longer considered federal student loans. The consolidation was into private loans. And that consolidation was at a higher interest rate. Sometimes they moved. And people are desperate. My God, I'm in default. I've got to get this default off because I've got to buy a car and I want to buy a house. And this is the kind of stuff that happens to people now.
Yes. Horror shows that create great unhappiness, okay, and suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Biden has been getting criticized for canceling student debt on grounds that what he's done so far will cost the Treasury $329.7 billion. Now, this is from uh, okay, this figure is from an analysis that came out of the Wharton budget model, okay, of the University of Pennsylvania.
Was that on the $10,000 means tested? I thought that was on more.
No, that was on the $10,000, and the figure was 329 point. Well, it was the $10,000 and also the $20,000 for Pell Grants, and it was $329.7 billion was their estimate for how much that was going to cost the Treasury of the United States over 10 years. Okay, so in other words, what this was you start with the borrowers who have debts, and then there are projections of how much the government is going to get back on these particular debts. Okay, and the projected estimate over 10 years was 329.7 billion. So, if the government forgives those debts, okay, when people say that's going to cost the Treasury 329.7 billion, what they mean is that stream of payments over 10 years is now something the Treasury is not going to get because you forgave the loan. And so that means 329.7 billion is not going into the Treasury spending account when it otherwise would have found its way into that account if the loans had not been forgiven. So when people say that canceling student debt is going to cost that much, they don't mean it's going to cost that much today, or that the Treasury is losing 329.7 billion out of the Treasury spending account for today. What they're talking about is a payment stream that will no longer be there. Okay, the same model also concluded that if Biden goes further and cancels up to $50,000 debt, why $50,000 debt? Because there were proposals from Chuck Schumer and from Elizabeth Warren, a joint proposal from the two of them, that Biden should cancel up to $50,000 debt. So the model projected losses to the Treasury in that case over a period of 10 years of $935 billion. Okay, there's an article in this that came from the Washington Times on August the 23rd, which gives these estimates. So you hear these, horrific estimates. It's going to cost $329 billion. It's going to cost $935 billion, which the Treasury account is going to lose because these payment streams have been canceled. So that's the claim you're getting from the critics. Okay. But the implication of this analysis from the budget model is that the lost Treasury credits would have to be replaced by tax revenue or bond sales proceeds, or perhaps a mix of the two. And taxpayers would therefore eventually be on the hook and would lose $329 billion or the $935 billion, as the case may be. Now, here's where what we're not supposed to forget comes in. Reasoning like this neglects to mention that there are other ways for the government to add credits to the Treasury spending account. And so government is not locked into either taxing or spending to replace these losses. So taxpayers don't have to be out of any money at all if government forgives this debt. Oh, that applies to the $10,000 case. It applies to the $20,000 case. It applies to the $50,000 case. And it applies to the case where the government is forgiving all the debt. The Treasury spending account need not be out of any money at all over 10 years. Why is that the case? Because there are two things that government can do to prevent this from happening. There are actually more than two things, but here we'll only focus on two things. Okay, the first thing is, under a law passed in 1995, I believe it was, it's possible for the Treasury Department, for the Secretary of the Treasury, to order the mint to create a 1-ounce platinum coin with a face value that will cover the supposed losses. It could be a coin worth $328.7 billion, or it could be a coin worth $935 billion, or whatever. But the Secretary of the Treasury can cause the mint to create such a coin and deposit it up in the mint's public enterprise fund account, which is sitting at the New York Fed. And the Treasury can then sweep the mint's account for the seigniorage, which is almost the whole face value of the coin. It's the face value of the coin minus about $5,000. The seigniorage can then be swept into the Treasury spending account. So the $935 billion or the $329.7 billion at that point is in the Treasury spending account, and those projected losses, the projected losses the Penn-Wharton model is talking about, have been replaced by an equivalent amount of credits. And that's all. That's all one would have to do to get rid of this issue completely. If the Treasury Secretary wanted to do that, the Treasury Secretary is authorized by current law to do that. But let's say the Treasury Secretary did not want to do that. Then it would be possible for the Congress to order the Federal Reserve to replace the projected $935 billion, let's say, to replace that, or to place that into the Treasury spending account as soon as the law ordering the Fed to do that was passed by Congress. So that's another thing that could be done to simply replace the credits in the Treasury spending account. So, what I don't want you to forget is that these two mechanisms can be used to create new money for the Treasury spending account. And so, forgiving student debt doesn't have to cost the taxpayers anything. So the so-called crisis caused by something like this is not a crisis that has to exist. It's a matter of policy choice.
Well, a couple of things that jumped out at me when I read that article again, because I read it what feels like days and days ago. It wasn't, but what they have in there is Biden touting his deficit reduction, right?
Yes.
And Larry Summers, our favorite dude who always says things that like are so easy to poke holes in, coming out and saying that forgiving this student debt would cause inflation. And saying that the Inflation Reduction Act is slated to reduce the deficit by 700 and some billion, right? And that if he were to forgive all of student debt, or I think it was $50,000 per person, then it would be a trade-off of the Inflation Reduction Act supposed deficit reduction, right? Because I'm not buying that, but let's just go on this for a second. The Inflation Reduction Act was supposed to reduce the deficit. And doing this student debt forgiveness at $50,000 per person or more would then cancel out the deficit reduction. Now, everybody in MMT understands that deficit reductions are a bad thing because you're pulling assets out of the private sector when you do this, right? At least in this case. What I would have phrased this to say as a progressive candidate, maybe running for president,
Maybe running for president, indeed.
I would have said that we can use the Inflation Reduction Act to pay for the student debt forgiveness. Because it would have, if it were true. Okay. I am talking about the damn messaging and how ridiculous it is. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right, but I'm not talking about any abstract concepts of pay
No.
for.
I'm trying to point out the hypocrisy, and I think it's important, Joe. I think it's a very important point to make.
I think
Because
so
the
too.
truth of it is that these people have not been paying these student loans for 2 years. Okay. And this Inflation Reduction Act that I don't believe is going to reduce inflation worth a damn is going to get the inflationary reduction benefit of turning on these student loan payments.
Okay, but the point being,
Do you see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying.
Because it's going to pull money out of the pockets of everyone.
Yes, I see what you're saying. I completely agree with that. Okay, I have no problem with that. But the point, okay, I was making a different point, and here is yet another different point. Okay, we've had these payments on pause now, okay, for years.
2.
Okay, yes, for 2 years. If we canceled all the debt, that would not change the situation from the last 2 years, because the payments were not being made for the last 2 years.
Correct.
So to forgive all the debt is just to continue the status quo in terms of money being taken out of the economy. So
Correct.
we would not be getting any additional inflation compared to that we have now.
Correct.
So my point is, forgiving all the debt would not create any more inflation than we have now. So those who say that it would increase inflation compared to what we have now are obviously wrong. It would not do a thing. Okay. Now, if they rephrase it,
Larry Summers,
and they
anyway.
say, if we did start those payments, that would be deflationary and that would be good for the economy, then my response to that would be, well, if we eliminated the Trump tax reduction, then what that would do, okay, what that would do would be to take care of more than the 1.7 trillion which is owed, because that was taking 1.9 trillion out of the Treasury. Okay, the point is there's any number of things that you could suggest that we do to try to moderate inflation. And that brings up the further issue as to whether Larry Summers' way of moderating inflation, which is to put the student loan monkey back on people's backs.
Yeah.
There's the whole issue of whether that's the best way to moderate inflation, or whether it's the best way to moderate inflation, okay, is to penalize the corporations for overcharging, okay, or to regulate the corporations, so that we use regulation to moderate prices, or to have price controls. There are various ways we can attack.
Lots of better ways.
Lots of ways that do not put burden on poor people, okay, and middle class people. What Larry Summers always wants to do is to put burden on poor and middle class people and lift the burdens on the very rich people that he serves. And we all know that he serves them and he has gotten rich from them, and that anything he suggests that the federal government should do will not harm his cronies, the people who have made him rich, because he always looks out for their interests. He gets into federal policy circles and then he serves them. And that's why he should never get into those circles again. And that's why we should never take a bit of his advice, because that's what happens. He's an austerity
king.
Federal policy circles. He doesn't serve the people, he serves the donors.
Yeah, he's an austerity king.
He's an austerity king. Absolutely. That's absolutely the case.
And Joe, it brings up a couple of really good points, I think, because what we're talking about with this messaging, with the crazy messaging, is literally what translates into the politics, right? You've got claims being made about a bill that is going to, drill baby drill in the middle of an absolute perfect illustration of climate change with what has happened in Pakistan. I mean, when you look at the satellite imagery, it's overwhelming. If you read today and yesterday, I think there were articles starting yesterday regarding the ice melting in Greenland.
And we both read that piece.
I mean, that is also another shocking realization. But as if the Amazon being on fire and everything else that's happened wasn't enough, okay? We have legislation, and I'm going to piggyback on this, because about a week ago, here in Pennsylvania, the legislature voted to defy the regulations associated with fossil fuels. Literally defy the federal regulations that are mandates, okay? And then they passed the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, and now I'm finding out that, wow, this is really cool. It's the perfect time to bring the cracker plant in Beaver that is fueled by fracking gases, which means you have to have enough fracking wells operational to feed the thing, that's going to spew tens of millions of pounds of volatile organic chemicals that cause cancer into a topography that is the second worst typography in the country because we have an inversion here. The air doesn't clear out. All that gets trapped here, right?
Oh my God.
Okay. And when they do this as a state, it's got to go through a second session of the state legislature because you can't pass anything here unless it goes through 2 sessions of the legislature. I told you Pennsylvania's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
Yes.
All right. So even they have to go through another legislative round. But if this passes, I can't even remember the number, but there's like going to be, I almost want to say 10 billion. I might be off. Might not be 10 billion. I might be way off. And I can't believe I can't remember the figure. But it is a staggering amount of federal dollars that will not come to the state. Republicans are doing this. The same Republicans that tell you that they don't want to raise taxes. It's the Democrats that tax and spend. But they set up all of the circumstances to starve their fiefdoms. I mean, really, that's what it feels like. That this is how you control your subjects. This is the fiefdom. Okay? That's what austerity is. And folks, what's going on with student debt right now? The debt load and the interest rates and the borrowing and the cost of education 30 years ago was not as inflated as it is now. Okay? I am absolutely 100% on board with people saying, well, the student loan funding for loans caused the increase in costs for education. And there is a cause and effect there. Absolutely. For sure. 100%. Right? But back when I was going to school, they did something different and it was a lot more blatant. Ronald Reagan decided that any household that was making $30,000 worth of income, regardless of how many people were in school, trying to send your kids to college, that was too much money for your family to qualify for student loans.
Jeez.
Okay? So, the way that it happened, you have to sign a promissory note before you start school, usually months before you start school. You have to sign the promissory note. You've got to go take classes. They tell you what it means when you sign this promissory note, all about default, right? You're going to be a freshman, a sophomore, a junior in college, and you're listening to this. But the truth of it is that you're just so grateful that you're able to even go to college. Joe, you're frozen. Can you hear me? Oh boy, I hope people can hear me. So what they did was they told us our money was coming.
Okay, we're back. We had an interruption in it.
Okay, good. So the way that it worked when Reagan was in office, I think it was 1985. They had us sign our promissory notes for the start of the fall semester. So the beginning of school. We started in September. We signed those promissory notes in July or August, right? And we sent them back in and we started school. And our funding wasn't coming. Now you've got to remember that a lot of kids only borrowed for the classes and the credits. Other kids had to borrow for their room and board, right?
Oh yeah.
And if you were lucky enough to be living on campus, the school understood. But if you were living in an off-campus apartment, and many of us did because they didn't have enough housing on campus, your landlord wasn't so understanding. Okay? So a lot of these kids, not everybody, but a lot of us had to go out and get jobs to pay our rent that was supposed to be coming when our loans funded. So we signed leases, we put our names on utility bills, and the loans aren't coming through. And we're in school, and now we've got to go get a job because We can't stick our roommates with our portion of the rent, right? And by the way, most of them were in the same boat that I was in. Very few people didn't have student loans at the school that I attended at the time. We were in November. May have been late October. I think it was late October. And they got on the bullhorn because they did not have, they were not cell phones, and they're, there were intercoms in every building, and they told us that we needed to be out in front of the student loan office, financial office, at 2:00, regardless of whether or not you had a class. You will be excused from class. Oh boy, we were excused from class. We were immediately told we could not go back to class, that our student loan, our guaranteed student loans were not, that we had signed promissory notes with the federal government, were not going to be funded. You could not go back to class tomorrow. And if you don't pay your semester tuition by, I think it was the following Monday before class started, you weren't able to come back.
Jeez.
So
that's incredible.
Imagine having to come up with money that your family had to borrow in the first place, and being told that you've got 5 days and 2 of them are a weekend to come up with the cash to be able to continue, in my case, the last bit of my junior year.
Jeez.
Not only that, but because it had been 6 months from our last loan disbursement, which happened in the spring of the prior year. So you had the summer, and then you had the fall. We were past the 6 months disbursement. We were in default. You either come up with the money or you're in default. And if you can't come up with the money, you can't get back into school. Too bad. So sad. We're already working jobs to keep a roof over our head. That was the only saving grace, because at least we weren't, going back home to mom?
Yeah.
Some of us didn't have that option. It just wasn't an option. That was even more heinous, in my opinion, because what the Republicans did was basically say, we don't want these lower income children of the working class getting up into the ranks. We don't want them educated.
Our ranks.
Yeah.
Our ranks.
Yeah. My God, if they're making $30,000 a year, that household, they should be able to come up with putting their kid through college. Not even you can only qualify for half the student loans, right? It was, no, you're not getting anything.
Yeah.
And nobody forgave that debt. They threw us into default. Nobody ever forgave any of that debt, Joe. Nobody even talked about it. There wasn't even any outrage.
Yeah, because it was probably striking too few people to cause any outrage, right?
Well, in the school that I was in, no, that wasn't the case. I think there were 6,000 kids on campus, and there were a good 500 of them
who were caught that way,
that were standing out there listening to this bullshit with me.
Amazing.
I mean, I am sure that there were students who had an exam, right, in their next class that they probably had to make, and the teachers didn't know who was who, right? So if you just said, well, I'll just go later, I've got to pass my exam, they went. It was midterm time. So do you see what I'm saying? Like, the actual number of people who I saw standing there, I am sure there were maybe 30% more of them who just went, oh, the hell with it. I've got to go to class, right? Yeah. Nobody expected them to tell us that we couldn't go back to class.
Yeah, I know. That must have been an utter shock.
I'll tell you what happened that night. And the next 3 days, the bars made a killing. We all
Oh,
went and got drunk
I
because
bet.
it was as bad as it was ever going to get, Joe.
Yeah.
So, what I'm trying to get at here is this is a generational thing. But
Yeah, I
what's
know.
happened now with the debt burden, I mean, we had it too. Don't get me wrong. I feel for these kids because I went through it.
Yeah.
It took me 32 years to pay off my student debt.
So amazing. Yeah. I know of another case, perhaps even worse than that. The brother of a friend of mine also took out lots and lots uh, of debt, had interruptions in his life. He was ill. Very unfortunate things happened to him. He got older. He could never earn enough to pay off the debt
Mm-hmm.
or even to lower the size of the debt because they were piling on the interest rates.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, last time I heard the story, he was in his 60s. He was still subject to the debt. Okay, and my friend, who was a professor, was helping his brother to pay the debt down. So that was affecting two people. Okay, it had been affecting their mother for as long as she lived, because she was on the hook too. It was the whole thing was a real horror show,
Mm-hmm.
a horror show, and I'm sure thousands and thousands and thousands of people were involved. Okay, in that particular horror show. What I want to emphasize here is that with respect to cancellation of the debt, the people who are objecting to this on financial grounds, 329.7 billion, the 935 billion, whatever it is, that's an abstraction. What they're saying is those credits are not going to get into the Treasury spending account. And what I'm saying in return is that that's no big deal,
No, it's not.
because we could put this coin into the Treasury spending account and get those credits put back in the Treasury spending account. And by the way, this has nothing to do with inflation
No,
necessarily.
no.
All
It's
we're
not
talking
money
about
going into
is
circulation.
electronic credits that are or are not in the Treasury spending account. Now, if the Congress doesn't decide to spend those credits, if it doesn't appropriate any spending, that has no impact on inflation. We're not talking about anything that has an impact on inflation. So you can forgive the debt. Okay, I should say cancel the debt. It's not forgive, but cancel the debt. And just doing that and using the platinum coin or getting a congressional order to the um, Fed to put that much money into the Treasury spending account, those acts by themselves are not inflationary. Now, what comes afterwards, that's a matter of policy.
It is.
And we can all fight about that. But if you don't want to create inflation from doing that, then you don't have to create inflation from doing that. All you have to do is adopt the right policies to control inflation. And quite clearly, the right policies aren't listening to Larry Summers and the head of the Federal Reserve, Jay Powell, in terms of what they want to do to control inflation. They're not using this language, of course, but in plain language, what they want to do is to put the monkey on the backs of these people who owe the debt and not put the monkey on the backs of the rich people, because they could decide to tax the rich people tomorrow. Okay. And if they tax them enough, That would reduce inflation. Okay, now I understand that because of the fiscal multipliers involved, you'd have to tax them 3 times more than you would have to tax working class people or middle class people to get the same control on inflation. But taxing them that much more is good. It's good. It's not because of the money you raise, it has nothing to do with the money you raise. It's because these very rich people are a danger to democracy. And when you take that money away from them, take 3 times as much money away from them as from anybody else, that's good for our democracy.
They have 12 times as much money as anybody else, billions and billions of dollars.
Sure.
I mean, if you want to have the argument, you've got to argue both sides of the coin.
Yes.
If you want to tax the people at the bottom of the pyramid because there's more of them and you just want to squash them further versus taxing those that have all the money that you seem to feel we have to get our hands on, right? I mean, the hypocrisy in the arguments, I am hoping that it has become much more clear to the general audience after we've gone through this exercise.
Yes. Okay, so there are more things to consider here, just some other examples of why you must never forget that whatever money is not going into the Treasury account can be very easily taken care of by this power of the federal government to create these new reserves in the Treasury spending account. Okay, let's take a look at a couple of other things where this is relevant. There was a piece that recently appeared in Common Dreams that the headline on it is, "Days after approving another $3 billion for Ukraine war, U.S. says no more money for free COVID tests." Why don't they have money for free COVID tests?
Because they don't want to.
Because they don't want the free COVID tests. But of course, they can generate new money in the Treasury spending account whenever they want to cover the additional costs of the 3 COVID tests. I mean, the nerve of them not wanting to pay for free COVID tests anymore so they could pay for a war in Ukraine that nobody wants. Who wants to be fighting that war over the Ukraine? Who wants to be giving the Ukraine, what is it now, $60 billion or $65 billion? Then have the government turn to us and say they can no longer afford our free COVID tests? I mean, this is enough. It should send you into a total rage even to contemplate that they would do this. But of course, it won't send you into a total rage if you forget about the fact that they can always produce a magic coin to pay for anything they want to pay for that's for sale in US dollars here in the United States. Only the White House earlier this year requested $22 billion in coronavirus funding, including $5 billion in global aid to help people across the global south and prevent new variants from spreading. Okay, the Republicans and Democrats are only able to agree on a $10 billion deal excluding global spending. But that bill has so far failed to pass. But of course, this extra money for Ukraine sailed right through.
Well, and then the arms sale now, which is different than a aid, quote unquote, defensive aid package for the Ukraine.
Yes.
This is now a sale. Basically, come on, Mick, get your orders in now before this thing's over.
Yeah, it's for the military industrial complex.
Exactly. And by the way,
it's to make them richer.
That's also inflationary.
Yes, you might say that's inflationary, but of course that depends on what they're doing along with it. Okay, which is to say, if they are funding this as Biden wants to fund it through taxation, then it may not be inflationary here. It depends on who they tax and how much they tax them. It's something we cannot evaluate off the top of our heads.
Yeah, but why do they get to do that? We're not talking about a budget now, Joe. This is all outside. Why is there always money outside of a budget when it has to do with war?
Okay, this may be money that is outside of a budget, but that doesn't mean that every dollar spent won't be taxed on a one-for-one basis.
But who are they taxing, Joe?
I'm sorry, who are they taxing?
Who are they going to tax?
Well, I don't know who they're
Right.
taxing. The point
We
is,
don't know. They don't know how they're going to pay for it, right? What's
they
this
don't
question
know
that we
how
always get?
they're
How
going
are
to
you
pay
going to
for
pay
it.
for that?
They don't know how they're going to pay for it, but what they're going to do, okay, is to fight over how much they should be taxing, okay, and how much they should be deficit spending. And the austerity mongers, okay, are going to be saying uh, we should tax for the whole thing. And we don't know yet how it's going to work out.
Well, Joe, I'm getting very, very concerned about what it is going to cost to heat the homes here this winter. Because
Oh, you mean for fuel?
yes, we have a very harsh winter predicted in
Right.
the
But
east from a
right,
cold standpoint, right?
right. Okay, I know, but that raises yet another issue. Okay, and that other issue is uh, how much in fuel are we going to export, and what kinds of exports? We have now an export surplus in fuel. We're exporting more than we are importing. Okay, in that
Mm-hmm.
area.
Mm-hmm.
The question is the government going to leave enough that we can heat our own homes here? Or is the government going to prioritize foreign policy and send um, uh, so much fuel to Europe, okay, and to European allies that we run short here, okay, of fuel? Now, that's going to be a policy question for the government. There's going to be a lot of pressure on it to send fuel over to Europe and to other areas that are short.
Yeah, but that's just going to be a humanitarian aid that they're not going to not. They will vote. They will vote in favor of it. What I will tell you for certain is that because of the fuel shortage that is coming in Europe, all fuel, no matter where it is in the world, is going to cost one hell of a lot more.
It's going to cost more, but it's in the same market.
It
Okay,
is
but
in the same market, but it's moving around from different places where
it's
it
moving
is
around
not
from different
convenient.
places, but the government here can stop the fossil fuel that's created here from going into the international market if it wants to.
It's not going to want
It's
to do
a
that.
policy choice as to whether that goes into the international market.
We need to
And our
keep
people
it.
here should realize that we have enough fuel for ourselves. But the question is, do we have enough for us and also for the allies? Okay,
Well,
and I'm
the allies aren't going to
saying
be allies if we let them freeze, Joe.
I quite understand that, and I'm not suggesting the policy solution to this. What I'm saying is, because of the foreign policy choices that were made by this administration,
Mm-hmm.
we
Oh, yeah.
have this particular situation, which may give us a fuel problem this winter, ourselves. And this administration has to bear the responsibility for this. It put these ridiculous sanctions on Russia without thinking through whether those sanctions were going to blow back on us and blow back on the Europeans. So they made a terrible error, and they have to be held responsible for that error.
But they won't be, Joe. What's
Well,
going to
they will
happen?
be. They will be if we understand what's happened and we hold them responsible.
Yeah, well,
I
that's
mean,
an uphill
that's on
battle.
us. In other words, that's on us. But the first step in having that on us is for us to realize that they made this gross error, and that is not an error they should ever make again, that we should ever allow them to make again.
I hear you, Joe, but the vast majority of the American people still think that the Ukraine's winning this war.
I know. The vast majority of us are very far behind the power curve. But I think in the next 3 weeks, what the real situation is going to hit them very, very hard.
I don't know, because they've now got the serious situation to scream about, and that's what I'm seeing in the cycles.
They may have the serious situation to scream about, and I do agree with you. They have that to scream about, and they will scream. However, people will realize that the economic sanctions on Russia have blown back on us and that we are all suffering from it. They're not going to escape from such a realization because it's going to be widely pointed out.
Well, I hope you're right, Joe, but how long did it take for the American people to figure out that we were lied into the Iraq war? As a whole, as it being accepted as what happened, it took a very long time.
Yes, it took a very long time, but of course, people did finally realize, and the question is whether they have further realized that they cannot trust what they're hearing from the mass media and what they're hearing from the government, and they have to be aware of the fact that they're not getting an accurate picture of the world. At some point, they're going to learn that lesson. It's the old.
You would have thought that
Fool me
after
once,
Iraq.
shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. Fool me 3 times, whatever the rest of it is.
Yeah, but you've had Vietnam. That was the same. I mean, we got lied into that situation, and we got lied into staying in
We
that
got lied
situation.
into that situation, but that generation learned. Okay, we now have another generation, and the Vietnam experience is a salient for them because they weren't alive then in most cases.
No, there's a lot of the big voting bloc that put Biden in office, the steadfast, staunch voting bloc that put him in office, that was very much alive when Vietnam happened. They were in their teens.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, they were the anti-war movement. Okay, but they're older now. And it is, I cannot express how important it is to start to understand, do a little societal study, the psychology of society as people go through their generation and they have children now and grandchildren now. And what as a society, the teenagers of Vietnam, where are they at as a majority? What have they done? A lot of people who rebelled against the war, who were the people who didn't think they were ever going to live to 30, ended up being the very people who were very productive in society. Once the war ended and things started to change, and we got into this situation where they were old enough to finish college, go on to do what you do in your 20s through your 60s. Well, you're working, right? That is the time when you are your lifespan of economic force as an economic contributor to society is that span, right?
Yes.
If you talk to that generation, especially the people who, consider themselves hippies that didn't buy in, tune in, turn on, drop out guys, right? Guys and gals, the Woodstock crew, the people who actually stayed in that anti-war mode all through their lives and stayed activists, that's not the majority of that movement. That movement got married. That movement built homes or bought homes. They got jobs. They had kids. They had to put themselves and their kids through college. Those people now are in their mid-70s and older.
Yes, they are. So there are a lot of people who've been fooled before and who are now getting fooled again.
Or, and I hate to even say this, but I've had members of my family, not my immediate family, but family, who are of that age and older, who, they're of the opinion of, well, I'm just really glad I'm on my way out. There are those of us who really believe that it's important to do this work because there are differences that can be made, and there are messaging and learning that we can get out, and forums of discussion to have. Yes. There are also people who aren't in that mode, who've lived their lives, who wanted to retire and spend their twilight years not worrying about whether or not the climate was going to swallow the rest of their family whole, not worrying about whether or not they're going to witness World War III or another atomic warfare, right? Nuclear warfare, sorry. They don't want to think about that. They've come through it already. They just wanted to be happy with their kids. And I've got to tell you, Americans are spoiled in that regard. They're supposed to, they don't have to be retired and be rich, but they can be retired and be comfortable and have Sunday dinners and weekend picnics with their families, have their family come visit. The topics of conversation can be a little bit more mundane than nuclear warfare and, the polar ice caps and melting and sea level rise and rivers drying up and the doubling of their energy consumption, the cost of their energy consumption this winter. And wow, what's going on with Germany? That's really depressing.
I know it is.
Everybody's like, where's the anti-war movement? They're 75, 80 years old, for God's sake. Where do you think they are? It's your turn.
Yep. Absolutely. Okay, so there's another example. This one is from AOC. It appeared in Common Dreams. Okay. AOC says Congress could reverse Trump tax cuts to cancel all student debt.
Well, sure they can, Joe. They can fix everything if they had the votes and the political will. They can. They can.
Okay, so she said this on Saturday. She said that Congress could reverse the 2017 GOP tax cuts, which overwhelmingly benefit the rich and large corporations to finance the cancellation of all remaining student loan debt after President Joe Biden announced his more limited plan to wipe out $10,000 for most debtors or borrowers. She said, we can keep pushing in an email to supporters Remember that the Biden administration didn't want to do this at all. It was your pushing, your pressure, your organizing that got them to this point. They've forgiven far more debt for business owners in the form of the PPP loans who didn't need to meet any sort of income requirements or means testing.
No, that's not exactly true, but
for,
okay.
for almost $1 trillion in forgiveness. Mind you, she added forgiving all student debt in the U.S. is about 1.7 trillion. You could undo the tax cuts for the 1%, forgive all student loans, plus have money left over to contribute to universal child care, tuition free college, homelessness, etc. Okay, so she's saying this. And the
And
way
that's
she
not even
says
taxing the windfall that they've come across because of it. It's only reimposing what was there before.
right, but she's saying this, by saying this, she's playing into the frame of the Austerians, because what she's doing is she's implicitly saying there's only a finite amount, okay, of federal money, okay, and if we want to finance the cancellation of all student loan debt, we have to somehow get this money from the rich. Okay, in this case, the people who are benefiting from the 2017 GOP tax cuts. I'm not saying she's explicitly saying that, but that's kind of what she's implying here.
Well, she's shoving it back in their face. If you're going to make this
Shoving
argument,
it
I'm going to
back
make
in
it
their
this way.
face, but she's also denying the framing that whatever the hell happens to the rich, we can cancel the student loan debt, and it's not going to have any effect on anything.
Well, we can't cancel student loan debt if we don't have the votes. So I understand.
We can't cancel student loan debt if we don't have the votes. But the point is, the framing she's using goes away from the principle of the paradigm that the federal government can always create but new money in the Treasury spending account to pay for whatever it has to pay for. She forgot that here.
Well, yes,
but a different way, and that we can't have people forgetting this. We have to put this front and center always. Okay, especially people who know about this. You know, people.
But what you're highlighting, what you're highlighting, Joe, is the difference between reality and how we can put the credits back into the Treasury that are somehow over 10 years, because we are canceling student debt. People get this idea that it needs to be put back there. It in theory, it was money that they were planning on having in the Treasury. But if we were to mint the coin and put it into the Treasury, we would get rid of this artificial situation that we come into, where we have to play politics again, which is what the messaging coming out of AOC is. It's politics. And I will say this, because it's important to rise above the politics just from a conceptual level. Not everybody understands the difference. When I said we need the votes, it's not a vote. They need to know that they are going to have the support of the voters that are going to get them reelected, right? And if the rhetoric coming out of their mouths is too complicated, because it is true, once you have to start explaining on a campaign trail, you're in trouble. Your message has to be right from the get-go. You either have to know how to go and campaign and do it the right way with the appropriate message, knowing your demographics, going and meeting people where they are, understanding what the critical issues are, listening to them, doing surveys. It costs a lot of money to run a campaign that way, and you have to pay for the know-how to do it. And if you get the wrong political operatives in there, they're going to just run soundbite campaigns.
Yes, I agree with all that. But what I'm saying is, some way, somehow, but someday, we have to start framing things in terms of financial reality to people.
Well, we do.
We
We
have
do.
to we have to make the very simple point that government has the authority to add credits to the Treasury spending account whenever it wishes to, by order of the Secretary of the Treasury.
Mm-hmm. We know that. This audience that we're talking to knows it. The new audience has heard it now over and over again.
Yes, but the people that AOC was talking to, but needed to hear, I think, that all the student loan debt that could be forgiven because credits could be added to the Treasury spending account to cover the losses. To cover the projected losses from the cancellation of student loan debt. That's not really very hard to explain, Lisa. I reject the idea that it's hard to explain. You can explain to people.
I agree.
There
I
is a
agree,
law
Joe.
that allows you to mint, a platinum coin.
Do you really want AOC to be the delivery of that message? Because I sure as hell don't.
I want all the Democrats who now know the facts to be the delivery of that message. And if AOC delivers that message, I want all the others to follow her and to say,
Well, of course.
she's right.
But we
I
have
want them
to.
all to stick together.
They do have to stick together.
And the Democrats were saying that, and the Republicans were saying something different. We could get this kind of discussion going, and we could get it explained to people that Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution does provide for the federal government to create money in unlimited amounts. That point has to get over to all the populace, and there's no better way to do it than having the Democrats as a party and the Republicans as a party have a big conflict over it.
Mm-hmm. And that's why we need to run a progressive candidate for president, because that's what a presidential campaign is all about. And we are coming into that. But having AOC stand up there and stumble through that right now in the midterms, when Biden is trying to galvanize what's going on here, she would step all over herself. She would get annihilated right now. As soon as November is, wait, let me finish this thought. Let me finish the thought, Joe, because I let you finish yours.
Yes, you did.
As soon as they start announcing presidential runs, that is when it is time to start clashing with the lack of a platform, the lack of an economic message, the abject failure of the situation at hand right now, the inflationary situation that we've walked ourselves into, how we got there, and how we can fix it, right? Those are the things that you run on, and we can do that as a party. But right now, the Democratic Party, the machine, has a message. And that message, you, as a party, this is what you're talking about. You need the party to come together on this message. I personally have watched this message try to be delivered now since 2016. Okay? Over and over and over and over again. And politically, from a messaging standpoint and operationally, one outlier in Congress that's struggling right now with her audience that elected her is not the person to stumble over it at this point in time for two reasons. Number one, the party machine will make damn sure, because she went off on her own, okay? You see what they do to them, okay?
Yes, I agree, Lisa. Yes,
So,
I think you're right about this.
from a political operative standpoint, I am telling you, we've got to stop asking some one-off wonder brain to deliver a message that they're not equipped to deliver, number one. And number two, they're going to suffer. We don't need another political disaster. What we need is a political front line that comes out with the right messaging, the right money behind it. The whole thing scripted, paid for, in lockstep, an entire slate. And that's how you deliver that message, because we fumbled it and bumbled it and screwed it up for too long as a movement. We have to do it right this time, because it is now or never.
Okay, so I agree we have to do it right. But there's also a role for us in the mass. Okay, and that is we have to keep on talking about it. We have to not let the professionals just never talk about the plain truth that the government can add to reserves in the Treasury spending account whenever it wants to. We have to keep on sending this message out, because if we don't keep on sending
Well,
out,
we're here.
it's going to be blocked out.
Well, and here's the other side of this, Joe. The Democratic Party and all the independent voters, all of us, I think we are going to be looking at an unprecedented situation here. Okay, vote blue no matter who. Boy, oh boy, I can't wait until I can use that to my advantage. Okay, if we could get a progressive candidate nominated, vote blue no matter who in the primaries, in a national primary, and have it matter for the good of the people, the party will have to coalesce. And even if the party operatives don't like it, it's okay. Because what we have crested at this point in time, when we are looking at a general primary election, and even now, the younger generations finally have overtaken the traditional voting bloc that has been the stranglehold that the Democratic Party has had on the party. For the first time in 40 years, they are outnumbered by the generations underneath them. And women, because of Roe. Okay? So if you're a feminist, if you're a younger generation, if you're an old hippie, if you're a labor organizer, if you're a climate activist, what am I missing here? LGBTQ folks, trans efforts that are out there right now, housing. Let's just keep this going. Student debt, medical debt, regulation on industry, funding the government agencies again. All of us, right? This is our time. If you can peek your head out from the silo that you bust your butt in, and God love us all for doing it, but we have to come out and look at what's actually going on. It's also very, very valuable to me, even though I hate to see that people are going to suffer and worry, but that's what austerity does, that we're going to have to go through a winter. And it's right here, a harsh winter. where we're going to see the fruits of the disastrous foreign policies that we've executed on, front and center, with inflation, with higher costs of fuel, no matter whether or not we have enough here, Joe. Okay? It costs us more than buying cheap crude from some other places that we're not going to get it from anymore. It is inevitable that energy is going to cost more, period. Glut or no glut. We are not
Yes,
going to
it
have the
is.
bargain of the
Yes.
cheap stuff.
Yes, it is absolutely inevitable until we make the transition.
So, as awful as that is, being cold in the winter, having to pay astronomical fuel bills, which, by the way, the states are going to have to come up with ways to subsidize people. Now is the time to get legislation together and get on your Congress people that are running right now. They will have to put bills in place in your state house that will deter any shutoffs of energy for low-income families and the elderly. The end. You cannot allow them to shut the power off on people this coming winter, because they will. And they don't give a damn if they freeze to death.
Yes, and the older and the poorer people will die if
Yes.
you let them shut off the power.
And we're going to have to get our heads around this, and the time to do it is now.
I agree.
It's right now. So if you can get yourself to rallies, town halls, these are the things that you have to be thinking of. You've got to get out in front of this cycle and know what's coming so that you can say, hey, you want my vote? I want to know what you're going to do right now to ensure that nobody's power gets shut off in December when fuel prices are going to climb. And we don't know what this is going to look like, but we do know that fuel here in the US, no matter whether we have enough of it or not, is going to cost all of us more money. That is a guarantee. Unless the government gets into some price fixing. Kind of doubt it. Haven't done it yet, but maybe. But again, this is all political pressure that people will not tolerate this. The age of abundance, the neoliberal abundance, right? What do you mean we don't have enough energy? You just said we had a surplus. Why are energy prices going up? Oh my gosh, you know that little tweet I did today about cost basis? Our cost basis in our fuel has just gone up, whether people realize it or not.
Yes,
the why we can talk about later, because there's only so much cognitive dissonance we can throw people into. Honestly, that's our job. That is our job, to say the truth and take the fire.
Okay, I think that's great, Lisa. That was a great statement. Okay, let's take a look at some of the comments.
Hi, Wolfbrand and Brandy and Ghost Art. Sandy's here.
Yeah, we got our people here tonight, all right.
Michael Groves.
Of course.
Lana's here.
Lana is here, yes. Okay, so let's go from the beginning. And Steve says your debt can double in a very few years. That is to say, Steve Wolfbrand said that. Steve Wolfbrand says, Demented Joe would spend the coin for an ice cream cone. And he also says you need a red beret.
Who needs a red beret?
He said you need a red beret.
Me? I do have many. Where are they now? I've been so...
Some with some holes in it so that you can wear it in the winter.
No, I have one. It's not. It's like 80 degrees outside right at the moment.
I know. And the only one I can wear right now at this temperature, Kay, is the one that Laura made for me.
Well, you know what, Joe? I did those. I did the same. I'm in the same situation that you're in. I had all kinds of great berets that were lighter and, more appropriate for when it's weather like this. And I mailed them all off. So I have, and this isn't red, and with this camera, it actually looks gray. It's burgundy. It's deep burgundy, but and even this is a knit wool beret.
Yeah, that's the wine colored one, right?
Yeah, but this is great. This is really great yarn. Laura is always like just amazing with all her fabrics and stuff. It's hot. And come on, guys. I mean, they have hot flashes these days. I'm not going to lie. Not fun.
Yeah, Bonnie knows all about that.
I know.
I know. It's so true. Like, I'm going to do this for as long as I can help it, but I'm going to tell you right now, the minute I start sweating, it's gone. I can't help it. I can't help it. You know what I got to do? I've got to do what Laura does. I got to get a mannequin behind me so that if I take it off, there's still a red beret on somebody's head.
So Ghost Start says, I found the one and only one redeeming quality of TYT. Jessica Burbank's been spitting MMT fire. Mind blowing. Check it out here. And then he leaves a Twitter link for us.
Her name's Jessica Burbank?
Yeah, Jessica Burbank's been spitting out MMT. That's great. And Lana appreciates that comment from Steve Ghost Start. Let me go through more. Ghost Start says only 15% of black students attended a highly selective institution, and only 8% of black students attended an elite research institution. Pooh, I didn't catch the icons. Touting IRA is a great racial equalizer. Laughable. Yes, it is laughable. It's very laughable. And Sandy Darity had some choice words to say about that, I believe. Steve Wolfbrand says, Reagan, one of the worst presidents ever. I know. One of the worst presidents ever. Absolutely.
Nancy loves him. He's her favorite.
I know.
We need Fetterman for president.
We need Fetterman for president.
I think it would be great if Fetterman would run, if Bernie would run. Who else? There's somebody else that I want on stage that I was really excited about, and I never thought about it before.
Oh, you mean Jeff Merkley?
No, Beto. And don't laugh.
O'Rourke?
Don't laugh. Don't laugh. Because he's kicking butt in Texas right now. I mean, come on, you guys. You can hate him all you want, but he is not the Beto of old. As a matter of fact, through this campaign, his hair's turned white. The man is busting it. He's running an anti-gun campaign in Texas, and he's ahead in the polls.
Is he ahead in the polls?
Take your hat off to that.
Yeah.
I'll take my hat off.
I'm sweating. There. Whew.
Jerome Powell, monetary policy to be tightened based on two big lies that the federal government can run short of dollars and federal deficits cause inflation. Ludicrous via Mythbusters. And Steve Ghostart leaves us another useful link. Sandy says they will let us freeze. Kay says MMT will do no good until the Fed admits it. Well, could be.
Whether the pressure comes from the bottom or the top, the messaging right now is so critical. We can't fumble this ball.
Yes, the messaging is very critical. I agree. Brandy says this is why they will probably lose the midterms. Well, I don't know. The polls are turning. We still don't know what's going to happen. The Republicans still have to be favored, but there are probably only a couple of more things Biden has to do to really, give the Democrats likely control. I don't want to celebrate that too much because we have to then keep on fighting Democrats for good things. But we do have to eliminate uh, uh, the Republicans from consideration as much as we can. Steve Wolfbrand says Michelle is a man. Oh yeah, he keeps saying that about.
Every once in a while, Steve starts putting out like the classic, like
Crazy stuff.
the Republican line one-liners, and I think it is reminiscent of me dating my husband with his dry, deadpan humor and being like, I don't know if I should laugh. I'm not sure where I am right now, and I've wanted to say this for a very long time. So there, I said it.
Steve says the Russian sanctions backfired. They certainly did. Obama is related to the Bushes. Steve says I protested Vietnam War. So did I protest the Vietnam War. I was out in the streets quite a bit. Steve says Obama's mother had CIA connections. Lana says those boomers are watching mainstream news and not doing much else. Sandy says I don't watch it. Historical floods in Pakistan, says Brandy. 1/3 of Pakistan is underwater. Over 1,000 people, which includes roughly 380 children. Lana says, oddly enough, that tax cut helped me, and I am hardly the 1%. Yes, that's true. You are hardly the 1%. It did help some people, no question about it.
Oh, but it kicked the butts of some others.
Michael Graves says minting the coin is sleight of hand, gets around the requirement for selling bonus to offset the spending. Just change the laws to require new bond sales. There's a political aspect to minting the coin, Michael, and that political aspect is to show the public that the government can pay down the debt anytime it wants to, so that the size of the debt and the debt to GDP ratio are just not important. They're not things to worry about. In other words, minting the coin is a political weapon against debt terrorism. That's why it should be done. That's the only reason why, it should be done, because it's not financially necessary to mint the coin. You could stop the need for the coin just by, repealing the debt ceiling law. That could be done in one afternoon. But it wouldn't stop the political aspects, the debt terrorism. Yeah, the law for the coin is already on the books. And square one to put that in motion is with Treasury, not Congress. If you want to see the history of the coin and the coin law and aspects of that, then buy my book, from Amazon. It's called Fixing the Debt. I won't give you the very long subtitle. If you look for Joseph M. Firestone and Fixing the Debt, you will find my book. It's $9.99. It's a Kindle book.
It's very good. And I have many books of yours that I haven't. I hate when I am in the middle of, not even in the middle of, started 6, 7 different books, and I'm not being able to pick them all up.
I know it's hard to find the time to read. I understand quite well. Steve Wolfman says, no, water is the worst. You can't use your toilet or shower. And Michael says, minting the coin kicks the can down the road, fails to undo the methodology, and so doing it validates the methodology. No, that's not so.
No, that's not it at all. Joe, you need to explain a little better.
Okay. From a political standpoint, first of all, the size of the coin you mint in terms of face value, that is very, very important. If you just mint, a $1 trillion coin to get by the debt ceiling, that's only a half measure. It's not going to do much, to undo the methodology. But if you mint $100 million coin, and people then see you very rapidly paying down the debt, the first thing they come to understand is the government has the capacity to add to the Treasury spending account whenever it wants to do that. And that is really the central thing that people have to learn. In other words, once people learn that, once people also learn that that money can't be spent unless the spending is appropriated by Congress, those are the two most important things that people have to learn. The third most important thing is that what counts is whether you have an inflationary situation because you're spending too much. So you have to you have to design your economic policy so that there are various controls in it to handle inflation, because inflation is the constraint. That is the constraint. There is a constraint. MMT doesn't say there are no constraints on the policymakers. It says that the constraints arrive from the consequences of the fiscal policy. Lana says minting the coin does nothing of the sort, just another tool in the box. I don't know if it's just another tool in the box. I think it's an extremely important tool in the box because of the political uses of it.
Well, and it's not just an imaginary thing. It literally puts money into the Treasury so that we are no longer having this arguments of, we're not held hostage from
by the argument that we're going to run out of money in the
yeah.
Treasury spending account, because when it's $100 trillion in the Treasury spending account, we ain't going to run out of money. Okay, even if we pay off the $30 trillion in debt that we have now, as they fall due, there'll still be $70 trillion in the Treasury spending account to use for other things.
And it will increase as Congress appropriates programs as well. I mean, there are all kinds of ways that money is allocated, created for that balance, that ledger balance. And, I always want to offset with there's all kinds of things that happen every day in creating money, and the Fed buying commercial paper that put so much money into circulation that when we get buried in this debt, there's $30 billion over 10 years. If people realized how much money is in circulation, that's where you start being able to say, my God, it's chump change. Get over it.
Yep, it's chump change. Get over it. And people don't understand what the level of reserves is that's in circulation. It is huge. Ghostlight says, you down with overt congressional financing? Yeah, you know me. Says Ghost Start at 10:45. Yeah, I'm down with overt congressional financing. In fact, I believe I'm the one who named overt congressional financing. Okay, I think I'm the one who wrote the first articles on it.
And, it's really interesting lately, Joe, that we're finding out that, we can agree with individuals who profess that, if they lived in the United States, they'd be a Republican. And yet we love their policy stances on foreign policy.
Yes.
And hegemony and multipolarity, what's the other word they use? Now they're calling it not multi-level, multi-dimensional. Anyhow, they're not saying polarity anymore.
Oh,
They're saying,
okay. It could be multilateral.
yes, multilateral.
Sometimes
Multilateral.
they call it multilateral as well.
So when it comes down to this kind of stuff, there are subtleties. But like Joe said, there are many ways for things. And just because you're going to come into a budget shortfall because these projected cash flows are going to show up in the Treasury at some point. What is Bonnie over there?
Yes.
Yes,
Couldn't see her.
she was trying to see you. Okay, and I was moving my camera so she could see that.
Oh, I'm off camera because I'm outside with the dog.
Ah,
I don't want you to have to sit here and look at the dark. But the dog had to do his business, and I'm on the hook.
Yeah, the dog has to do his business. Absolutely.
I got a new dog, everybody. So,
Yeah, his name is Archer, right?
yes, it is. Archer was the only way that I was going to sneak in Archie. I had to go. Sometimes you have to go one way to be able to jog back to the original idea. I mean, we do that here a lot. But just because you had a plan for a certain number of cash flows into the Treasury accounting, right, ledger, and you do something that, okay, this is the projected shortfall of the anticipated Treasury ledger balance. In the grand scheme of things, so what?
So what? So what is right? And that's the trap that they always use. In other words, they do a projection of what is going on now, and then they say, oh, we have solvency problems. We're going to run out of money. Okay, and they're lying to you because they know, yeah, if we don't do anything about it, yeah, we're going to run out of money, but it's so trivial to do something about it. And by now they know that it's
It's a
trivial.
dog whistle. It's a hot button issue to get everybody riled up. Oh, you're going to raise my taxes. No, I tweeted this out the other day. Prove it already. I get so tired of people. Oh, we're going to have to pay for this. Prove it. Map out the debits and credits for me and show me how this happens. You can't, because it doesn't happen.
There are lots of people in Washington. There are a whole interest group, different foundations and think tanks and things like that. They all work together to push austerity, and they all hide the fact that, of course, the government can create its own credits in the Treasury spending account. Okay, and the way it's paid for all the time is that the Congress appropriates the spending, and if and when the Treasury Department runs short, one way or another, through various mechanisms, through various tools in the toolbox, the Federal Reserve is triggered to create the new reserves in the Treasury spending account.
And,
Okay, I have diagrams showing all this.
How we deal with inflation, what they are proposing right now is austerity. And they haven't even clued us in yet. I mean, the student loan borrowers, if you're wondering what this is about using you to take some of the burden off of and I'll say this out loud, in my opinion, the inflation that this Inflation Reduction Act is going to cause. Sorry, I believe that in my heart.
Oh, I believe that too. I don't think the Inflation Reduction Act is going to reduce inflation. Okay, and anyway, okay, it's just a spit in the ocean.
It is.
In other words, it doesn't do very much. It's a relatively small effort. And whether it has the effect of reducing inflation or not depends on what else we do. And we're going to do a whole bunch of other things. And we're going to have to do a whole bunch of other things, not just to spend, but also to control inflation while we're spending. And
Hey,
we have to get a lot better at controlling inflation as well.
I have to ask you a question because I heard this today.
Shoot.
And I don't know if it's true because I'm going to be really honest. I was so disgusted with what I heard was in that act from very reliable sources that I didn't even want to open it up because there's only so much that one person can take sometimes when they start reading through policy. Is it true that it puts a minimum tax rate on corporations of 15%?
That's true.
Well, that's a step in the right direction. Why didn't they lead with that? Because they're running, trying to keep Republican votes, and the Republicans don't want that aired out there because they voted for it? Because nobody led with that.
Okay, they didn't want that out there, I suppose, because I don't know, maybe the donors didn't want that out there.
Yeah, I would think so. I don't think they want that out there.
No, I don't think they want that out there either. But there was a compromise on that among the Democrats. In other words, that was an act that was passed only with Democratic support. It was a reconciliation bill.
Yes, and I'm almost ready to get this dog in the house. They nixed the disallowment, they nixed the not allowing the loss carry forward for the corpse, right?
I don't recall.
I think that's the one that Cinema reinstituted. That's the one that
Yes,
like,
I
broke the
believe.
camel's
Yes,
back.
I believe now that you mention it, that it was Cinema who reinstituted that. Okay, because she saved her donors a pile of money that way.
Yeah,
and she told them it was the best compromise that she could get. And so they forgave her that the bill contained the minimum tax of 15%.
Come here. I want everybody to see you. Come here, Archer. Can you come here? Yeah. Hi. Well, stand up.
Or you want us to see Archer?
Yeah. Hey, wait. You gotta look this way. Look over here. Oh, he's moving around. There he is.
Okay. Hi, Archer.
He's a cutie pants. Sorry. Love the dog. Okay, hold on. I'm shutting the back door. You're not going back outside. I just got you in here. Stinker. Sorry. Okay. I'm going to go sit back down. See, I told you didn't want to be a part of this.
Okay, Steve says, I got to get to bed. I'll give you 15 minutes. Well, we'll be done in 15 minutes, Steve. No doubt about that. Thank you for giving us this final 15 minutes. And thank you for all the comments today, by the way. And Steve says, win buttons. Whip inflation now. Yeah, that goes back to...
Oh, remember that?
Goes back to Jerry Ford.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. China forgives 17 countries' debt. U.S. builds 17 military bases. China welcomed with gifts. And U.S. welcomed with stones. That's what Go Start says.
Yeah.
You're right on the money, Go Start.
Absolutely. We are... I said this from the very beginning when I heard back in February, well, I guess it was back actually when the Olympics was going on, when she was talking to Putin, and then we started hearing that there was agreements put together. I was concerned about the U.S. not being involved in diplomacy.
Yes.
Right? And the worst nightmare from what I'm always like going 3 steps down the road, because that's what you do when you're planning on outcomes and resources and a global economy and dependencies and scarcities and the whole thing. I'm like, I just remember thinking to myself, we better straighten up and realize that we've got to be adults in the room here. We can't be playing this hubristic Brzezinskiism anymore. I don't know if everybody has read the articles regarding what Macron said, but he said the age of neoliberal abundance
is over.
Is over.
Right. Because the kind of abundance he was talking about was neoliberal abundance. That's all he understands. Mm-hmm. He doesn't understand any other kind of abundance.
And that is,
we'll be working to have the kind of abundance that counts, the kind of abundance that is sustainable over a period of time.
that provides resources and infrastructure and jobs and
Right,
moving off of fossil fuels and
right. Okay, and
hopefully
equality and sharing.
and agreements on how we arm one another and not stepping on each other's toes because we respect that we need chips, oil, cheap oil, fertilizer, wheat.
And we need one another.
Yes, we do.
We need one another. We're not going to lick the climate emergency unless all nations collaborate.
And how is anybody able to send aid to help Pakistan if they even wanted to when they're in Europe is on the precipice of an awful winter because their prices there are guaranteed to go up
Even
50,
higher.
70%. And they're
Way, way
talking about
higher.
rationing fuel and not heating water.
Right. And we have to remember that even in normal times, their gas prices are roughly twice as much as ours. Okay, at any
Well,
given
they
time.
don't drive like we do either.
Yes, they have much more public transportation there,
Infrastructure.
and they don't travel also as long distances either. Okay, as we do.
Well, if they do, though, they can jump on a bullet train because they've had that infrastructure for decades now.
Yes, they have, and we, of course, have failed to develop it. They have some really nice trains over there. No question
And
about that.
very little cars that are much more fuel efficient. They ride bikes. They don't have these astronomical commutes to work. And they've got safety nets.
Yeah, it's much more livable. Of course, they have smaller apartments
They do.
and they have smaller houses.
And it's embarrassing when you go and you live there for 3 weeks. And I remember just feeling so guilty for the amount of cubic feet Americans harbor and the amount
that we occupy here.
It's wasted space.
Yes.
I mean, sure, you don't stretch out, but you learn to go outside. You learn to spend time. You go to the grocery store that's right around the corner every day because you don't have a massive refrigerator and freezers in your basements to handle your overflow because you go to Costco.
I grew up that way. We lived in an
Yeah.
apartment house, okay, in New York, and we went to the grocery store every day. It was around the corner,
Mhm.
or the vegetable store, or there are different stores. There was the fishmonger, fish stores.
Mhm. Yeah, and they support, and that kind of living fosters community.
Yes, it
We
did.
as Americans have been societally fragmented. The nuclear families and the generational families that used to live in neighborhoods or, close enough to see your parents. If your parents need to go pick up your kid, we don't have that anymore. Very few people have the luxury of that anymore. Right? And the necessity of it is coming back very quickly. We're going to need to, if we don't have family that we can be close to, we've got to be there to support one another because things are going to get hard. And they're not going to get as hard here as they're going to get in Europe. Hopefully, who knows? If we don't start realizing that we have to respect one another and help one another, who knows how bad this can get?
There's something else that Europe doesn't have. They don't have, the nations themselves are not currency sovereigns.
Correct.
They've turned over their currency to the EU. And that means if the individual nations want to adapt to climate change by doing deficit spending, to convert to solar and wind very rapidly. They don't have the policy space to do that. That policy space can only be created by the EU as a whole, and all the nations are going to have to agree on that to make that kind of change. Okay, in the EU, and they included so many nations in the EU now. There are too many nations to get agreement on something like that. I don't think they're going to be able to adapt. But we here do have the monetary sovereignty to adapt, and to adapt quickly in a relatively few years. But if we want to do that, we have to go on a war footing like Second World War.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to prioritize that as the most important thing to get done. And we have to harness the private sector to doing it, but government has to harness the private sector the way the government did in World War II.
Well, and if we get ourselves in wars that with current technology require fossil fuels, we're not going to get there.
We're not going to survive if we do that. And that's a further reason why the Ukraine war is so damaging. For us to have started that was the height, okay, of idiocy. And yes, folks, we did start it. We pushed Russia into a corner where, for them to stop themselves from being surrounded and slowly strangled, they had to do a military special operation. They could see it coming for years, and they prepared for it. There's no doubt.
They were telling us for years.
They were telling us for years, and we just ignored them. We just ignored them, and we tried to surround them. But someone today pointed out that the idea of surrounding Russia in this way goes back to the Crimean War and Lord Palmerston. That was the kind of foreign policy the British were trying to follow in the 19th century, to surround Russia and make them a non-factor.
That's why we got to pass the torch.
Yeah, we got to pass the torch from Lord Palmerston, going all the way back.
Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
Thatcher's dead. All of this.
So is Reagan.
And Reagan has been dead for a long time. And I'm sorry if I'm hurting anybody's feelings that might stumble across this. Too bad. That's fact. Brzezinski is dead. You know, we should have learned from the last go round of severe austerity. By the way, that's what we went through after the credit default swap mortgage debacle. That again was caused by predatory lending. Same exact conclusion to
it was caused by predatory lending. It was also caused by the fact that our governments but did not recognize that they could recover quickly from the recession by using a monetary sovereignty. They did not recognize that. They imposed austerity instead. In Europe, they imposed austerity instead, and we imposed a moderate kind of austerity here that led to the slowest recovery from a recession since the Second World War. A 6-year recovery from a recession. We never had that before.
And
why did we have it? Because Obama wanted to reduce the deficit as much as possible.
Yeah, Obama. What if your household, just ran up a bunch of credit card debt, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was the most ridiculous scenario comparison of a monetary sovereign comparing it to a household financial budget.
Yep.
Shame on him. How disgusting. It was disgusting.
How simple-minded.
No, not how simple-minded. What a liar.
Well,
Here's
that's true.
why we are going.
Yes, that's true. But also that analogy is very, very simple-minded.
Well, it's a lie. Obama knows better.
Yes, it's a lie. And you know who it comes from? It comes from Aristotle. It comes from Aristotle's politics. He thought the polity was like the household writ large.
And you know what? that is a mistake that Americans can make rather easily. Okay, I've got a banking background. I've got an audit background. We've gone through this before. Joe has written books on this. He's taught this. We're all MMT world, right? We pay attention. That's the whole purpose of why we're here. But you have to understand, and I think everybody here knows this, but always hoping that somebody from the outside looks at this and picks something up from it.
Yep.
The general public, it's very, very, very hard to have people who have been lied to by politician after politician after politician that they trust and they believe in because it was a better time than what we're facing now, or it's a better time than what we faced, 3 years ago. And it's two administrations, now that people have been, and I'm talking the younger generations now that I'm placing all my hopes on, because they're the ones that are putting us, along with women, over top of the prior voting bloc that's been in power and kept these neoliberals in power, and neocons for that matter, for 40 years.
Yeah.
Right? So it's hard for people to pick this stuff up. We came into this and stumbled upon each other when, Twitter was a lot more, you could get a lot of followers. You could reach a lot of people. You could go viral. Now, if you don't have a bot farm behind you, nobody goes viral. Going viral in our circles now, if you get 1,000 tweets, man, you're doing good on a good day.
Oh, yeah, you are doing good. Okay, if you get that. Go start remarks. 1.1 billion to Taiwan is a violation of a treaty the U.S. and China signed in 1982.
Yes, it is. It's blatant violation. I think they're begging for war, honestly.
Yeah, I think so too. Unfortunately, they are begging for war, and we're supposed to support them. We got to stop that.
Yeah. But, I hate to even bring this up because I hate the term. But it's like, how did the governments control the population throughout history? You go to war, you take the society down to its knees, you put the screws to them so hard, and then what's left? What did they just do? They just sucked all the money out of the citizens of the United States and sent it where? Up to the top of the pyramid. Right? And it almost seemed like light speed and desperate, right?
Yes.
It's almost, I don't think it was desperate. I think it was part of, if we're going to go to war, you got to allow us to make sure that we're going to be okay. Right?
Yep. So Sandy points out, which I had meant to point out as well at some point, and now is probably the time, that Gorbachev died today after a long illness, which evidently had something to do with COVID. Okay, but anyway, I want to say that that Gorbachev was a great man.
He was a good man in a lot of ways. A lot of courage, a lot of
courage it must have taken to break up the Soviet Union, to try to bring perestroika in with the party of apparatchiks around him, and with the history of the Soviet Union around him, all the enemies around him. That took one tremendous amount of guts. That probably saved us from getting into nuclear war. It probably saved us from getting into continuous trouble for a very long time. And all we did with the opportunity Gorbachev gave to us was we pissed it away following Brzezinski's foreign policy. We just pissed away the opportunity to create a better world that he gave us. But that wasn't his fault. We took advantage of the opportunity to bring neoliberalism to Russia, which then resulted in Putin's taking over and the consolidation, of Putin's power. But Gorbachev, he was a giant. History is going to recognize him that way. So I just wanted to say that. And I just wanted to say that he was one hell of a person, and we need to recognize that. So, thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for staying for all our rantings and ravings. And we will see you tomorrow night when we come together again. And tomorrow night, we're going to talk about just why we have corporations running our healthcare, actually providing our treatments, and why we don't have doctors doing that. So turn in for that show. Lisa's going to be front and center for that show. She knows more about that subject than anybody else I know. And she's going to be wonderful tomorrow night.
Ooh,
She was wonderful tonight also, but she's going to be wonderful tomorrow night as well.
I just want to say this because I think I owe it to everybody. And if I don't, fine, but I just want to say it. These are really tough times.
Yeah.
They're tough times for all of us. For those of us who are watching this stuff and realizing that our policies have just been downright ridiculous in some cases. And to talk about these subjects is hard. So if I get a little bit flamboyant about it or over the top, please forgive me. I am really, really concerned. And Joe is too. And I know all of us are. It is time. It is the perfect time for all of us to be motivated and want to change things, because the opportunity, it's presenting itself. It's going to be painful, but unfortunately that's when people get motivated. So I hope that what I do here provides value.
Lisa, it certainly does. It provides enormous value. So thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate everybody that sticks with us and watches this, and all of those who retweeted.
And thank you all for coming, everybody. And we will see you tomorrow evening.
Yep.
Good night. Please, everybody, have a very good night.
God bless everybody. Good night.